this NX, Lexus has brought us a strikingly styled premium compact SUV that's unafraid to go its own way when it comes to cars of this kind. It's the only model in its segment that can't be ordered in diesel form, with most variants instead offering beautifully refined and highly efficient petrol-electric hybrid power. The brand hopes this car will increase its European sales by a third. It'll certainly change the way a lot of people feel about Lexus.
Premium compact SUVs are all the same. Or are they? Here's one that's a little more individual, the LexusNX. Lexus isn't afraid to be different. It never has been. This was the company that proved top luxury saloons didn't have to be German, and the brand that pioneered hybrid power when others were only just getting to grips with diesel. Now, at last, it's turned its attention to the compact SUV segment, and perhaps inevitably with this NX model, its approach is once again somewhat unique. The looks, for a start, make this by far the most distinctive design in the segment. Now, amongst obvious rivals, even a Range Rover Evoque looks quite ordinary in comparison, while popular contenders like Audi's Q5 and BMW's X3 look positively mundane. Now, further setting this car apart is the technology that lies beneath its bonnet. In a segment that relies almost exclusively on diesel power, it's the only model in its class you can't fuel from the black pump, with most NX variants instead preferring the greener and more tax-efficient solution of petrol-electric hybrid power. Other promising attributes include class-leadingly efficient equipment and safety provision, and the promise of a practical cabin. For the right kind of buyer then, it sounds an interesting combination. Let's put this car to the test. You might at first think that Lexus has dropped the ball by not offering this car with the diesel power that dominates this model's compact SUV segment. Not so. The Japanese brand thinks that diesel engines have a little bit too much of the 19th century about them, and the advantages of the petrol-electric hybrid powertrain it prefers instead becomes apparent as soon as you press the start button and hear nothing. Silence. Next to us here, the guy's got a diesel BMW X3, and on cold mornings that thing will clatter on startup like a mini digger. Push the starter button here and the only sound you get in a Lexus NX 300h hybrid like this one is the soft whir of the steering wheel departing from its raised entry-exit position to your memory setting. Now the dials will spark into life and you can then ready yourself to slide away purely on electric power by pressing the EV button down here. Unfortunately, the car will only run for just over a mile on full electric power before the petrol engine chimes back in to recharge the battery packs, and then only if you keep your speed below 30 miles per hour. Which is one of the reasons why most of the time you probably won't bother with the full EV mode, because the NX is very clever at figuring out for itself when the electric motor and the petrol engine should work. Pull away in city traffic and you get this absolutely effortless pickup. The eCVT auto gearbox every 300h model has to have helps here, giving the car a lovely elastic flexibility from standstill, but without the kind of boom or bust thrashiness that afflicts many belt-driven auto CVT models. Now, once you're familiar with driving this car, it might be instructive then to jump into a comparably priced diesel SUV with a manual gearbox. It'll feel like going from using a MacBook Air to being asked to work with a clunky PC from the 80s. Get into jogging pace in the 4-cylinder 2.5-litre petrol engine this NX has borrowed from Lexus IS and GS hybrid saloons sparks up with a transition that is, again, ultra polished. In town, there's really no other SUV of this size that even comes close to the seamless waft of propulsion this car provides. So if you're looking for the most relaxing and refined compact SUV you can buy for shopping and school run duties, you can end your search right here. this is it. It's not perfect, mind. The ride is a little firmer than I'd want it to be, especially around town where composure is more frequently unsettled than it should be by potholes and speed humps and the scratchy tarmac legacy of shady cable companies. Now, you'll also need to get used to a brake pedal that's neurotically keen on harvesting power back to the hybrid system. As a result, not much more than a touch from your little toe can easily see you standing the NX on its nose until you adjust your left foot pressure to suit its demeanour. You adapt quickly though, and it's all part of this car's more individual experience. Much of which is down to the high-tech hybrid powertrain that I've been talking about, whose various machinations you can follow via a fascinating infotainment dash display graphic there to show you at any given time what's charging or being powered by what. Lexus quotes a combined output of 195 brake horsepower for this NX 300h model, so this power plant's thrust is quite comparable to that of directly rival diesel models like Range Rover's Evoque SD4, Audi's Q5 2-litre TDI, BMW's X420D, and Volvo's XC60 D4, the likely alternative as potential buyers will probably be considering. I use the phrase combined output. Now that's because only 154 brake horsepower of the hybrid system's total punch is provided by the 2.5 litre petrol engine I referenced earlier. The rest is supplied by an electric motor. In terms of sheer performance, what all this delivers is a rest to 62 mph sprint time of 9.3 seconds on the way to a maximum of 112 mph. Now that's a fraction less than you'd get from the conventional diesel rivals I just mentioned, but a difference not enough to be significant for most buyers. The speed stats are the same whether you choose your NX 300h in 2 or 4-wheel drive form. Lexus insists on offering the hybrid model with both options, despite the fact that even the E4 all-wheel drive version powers through its front wheels nearly all of the time. Now here I've got the 4x4 variant that most buyers will choose, which brings rear-wheel traction to the party when conditions demand it, courtesy of a second electric motor that's solely there to drive the rear axle. It's a setup even less likely to take you very far off-road than a conventional mechanical package would on a car of this kind, but for muddy car parks and icy mornings, it'll be quite sufficient for the needs of most likely owners. But of course you won't be buying this car expecting to conquer the Serengeti. Now you might though harbour some expectation of being able to ask a little more of it than the usual urban duties. Now can this NX deliver as a dynamic match for best-in-class rivals? Well, Lexus certainly wants it to, for the first time in one of its SUVs fitting its Drive Mode Select system, a setup that, via this rotary dial by the gear stick, offers different driving modes that allow you to adapt the car for different driving conditions and driving styles. Click the dial to the left for an eco mode that will prioritise efficiency around town, or switch it to the right for a sport setting that will instantly switch the hybrid instrument binnacle display to a red tinged rev counter and deliver you sharper performance when the road opens up and you really want to flex your right foot. It's the kind of driving most likely to appeal to customers of the purposeful-looking F Sport variant, which is probably why this version alone gets the option of an adaptive variable suspension system that adds an extra Sport Plus setting to the Drive Mode Select system. Now, if you are a potential NXF Sport buyer, AVS is an essential box to tick, as without it, you can't do anything about the over-firm ride this version's sport suspension and performance dampers deliver. With AVS as part of the package, though, the NX becomes a far more likeable thing. The electronics smoothing out bumps and compensating for uneven surfaces, as well as reducing body roll and improving cornering agility. It's annoying, though, that Lexus doesn't offer this feature more widely across the range. Whatever spec you do choose, though, this car isn't really in its element being chucked around country roads. Now, for all the improvements made to it, the hybrid powertrain still isn't as linear and responsive in its power delivery as a conventional petrol or diesel engine would be. Now better is the more conventional 235 brake horsepower 2-litre petrol turbo engine fitted to the minority interest NX200T variant that Lexus is offering as an option for buyers who simply can't get on with the idea of hybrid mobility. With this model, 62 miles per hour is 7.1 seconds away en route to 124 miles per hour. Even here though, your enthusiasm for using that performance will be somewhat tempered by the preferences of an over-enthusiastic stability control system that cuts in at the slightest sign of cornering vigour, disguising a talented chassis that actually has quite large reserve of front-end grip. Now this approach may make the NX almost uncrashable on a typical windy road, but it won't endear this Lexus to many of the folk who buy BMWs and might not be too thrilled at this level of non-switchable interference. Still, horses for courses and all of that. If, quite understandably, you don't quite see the point of an SUV designed to be thrown about, you'd probably be very pleased with the driving characteristics of this car. It knows its marketplace. Remember when Lexus models tried to look like their competitors? Seems a bit quaint now, doesn't it? Those days are long gone, and in this NX, what we've got instead is one of the most individual designs on offer in the current market. It's styling an absolute riot of contrasting angles, swage lines and details, all competing for your attention. It has absolutely no right to work, but somehow it just does. I think it looks great, but styling is, as ever, largely subjective, and you might think it's terrible, which of course is completely okay. Go and buy a BMW X3 or an Audi Q5 in this segment if you don't want anyone to ever notice or comment on the car that you drive. It's just a case of whether you want to spend as much as is required for a car of this kind on something wholly unexceptional. Powerfully flared front and rear wings are fused to a diamond-shaped body with defining lines generated from the most overt interpretation yet of the brand's trademark spindle grille. Now this feature dominates the front end, almost dwarfing an acutely styled set of LED headlights that sit above tick-shaped daytime running light strips that also twinkle with high-tech LEDs. The whole effect might not quite be as extreme as we saw on the LFNX concept car that in 2013 originally inspired this model, but chief exterior designer Nobuyuki Tomatsu's penmanship is still fresh, edgy and different. It's thoughtful too. The artful disguise in the way these door handles conceal their key barrels is a particularly neat touch. Lexus wanted the NX to look as if it had been carved from a solid nugget of metal, and you can certainly see that effect as you move round to the sides. Now take the door detailing down near the sills that look like it's been precision milled by machine, almost sharp enough to cut you. Now I also love this convergence of swage lines down here by the rear C-pillar, and the way that this one here runs up from the back wheel arch to frame these smeared forward taillights is brilliantly executed. Now it's true that the end result of all of this aesthetic excess has proved difficult for Lexus to finesse aerodynamically, hence the need for this lipped rear spoiler to preserve a halfway reasonable 0.33 CD drag factor. Still, we think the effort's been worth it. This NX is certainly going to stand out in a car park full of German metal. It appears smaller than it really is too, thanks to the artful chamfering you'll find on each of the corners. Now the bodywork actually sits on the chassis of a Toyota RAV4, but if nobody told you, you'd probably look at it and think it competed with Audi Q3s, Mercedes GLAs and BMW's X1s from the next class down. Now get the size into perspective and the next thing you notice is just how hard Lexus has worked in creating a sleek shape without compromising rear headroom. Now the highest point of the roofline being stretched backwards. It's all part of a crouching muscular stance accentuated by flared wheel arches that house either 17 or 18-inch alloy wheels. And if you're like me, it's a shape you won't be able to help taking a long, lingering glance at every time you leave your car for the night. All this being the case, it would have been particularly disappointing if on the inside, Lexus had served up something more conventional. Fortunately, they haven't done. Take a seat here and the shape of the dash in front of you is a world away from the simple planes you'd find in, say, a Range Rover Evoque, and it's certainly far removed from the kind of BMW or Audi cockpit that would have flowing natural shapes. Here instead, the look and feel is more deliberately modern with sharp angles and bold slashes of wood and metal. It's all evidence of Lexus's growing confidence as a car maker. True, there's a lot of design going on here and some of it can seem a bit fussy in places. Overall though, I reckon it all works, and against the odds in some places. Now, Lexus clearly doesn't hold with the current fashion for decluttered dashboards, and there's no way an analog clock should sit amongst all these high-tech buttons and LED readouts without looking anything but bizarre. Even so, the NX pulls it off. It also incorporates its flat-screen infotainment display without the iPad stuffed in the fascia feel that similar installations give you in some rivals. Though at 6.2 inches in size, the display isn't that big. It's controlled on top models like this one from a touchpad, which is much easier to use than the maddening mouse-like thing the brand used to offer, if not quite as intuitive as rival BMW iDrive, Audi MMI or Mercedes Command systems. Lexus is slowly getting there though. While it's easy to get drawn into some of the lovely details like the removable mirror in the center console and the wireless smartphone charger, what's more important is that the fundamentals are absolutely rock solid. Now, the driving position, embellished by soft leather knee pads either side of the prominent center console, is high-end commanding, and you control things via a lovely, grippy, thick leather-stitched 3-spoke multifunction steering wheel. And through this, you view a clearly defined set of virtual dials separated by a centrally positioned 4.2-inch TFT color multi-information display. Look about and there's great all-round visibility aided by large mirrors, which help to compensate for the fact that you can't quite see the corners of the car when manoeuvring. Still, most models get an effective set of parking sensors that help you deal with that, and on this top Premier version there's also a 360-degree panoramic view monitor that uses 4 cameras relaying their images to the central display panel in 7 sequences, so you can accurately check your surroundings before driving off. The cabin's also more spacious than you expect it might be, with Lexus claiming a class-leading distance between front and rear seats. And there are plenty of practical storage areas, including space in the center console and a decently sized glove box, a compartment for your sunglasses, and door pocket holders for half-litre bottles. Plus cup holders too, of course, fashioned with that typical Lexus attention to detail, courtesy of high-friction lining that lets you open a twist cap bottle one-handed. Now, I just know that I'd fire Coca-Cola all over the cabin if I tried that, but it's a nice idea in principle. Take a seat in the rear and the feeling of spaciousness continues. Now, I mentioned earlier the way that rear headroom has been preserved, though it can be compromised a little if you opt for a model fitted with a panoramic glass roof. Now, there are no legroom issues though. Now, I've been in SUVs from the class above that have less rear knee room than this. And better still, the floor is almost completely flat, meaning that this car can far more credibly carry 3 adults in the back than any of its more compromised rivals can manage. Now, these rear seats also recline, which makes longer journeys in the back far more relaxing. Out back, plusher models get this arthritically slow powered tailgate that rises to reveal a 475-litre luggage capacity. Now, that's a little less than some rivals offer, though is substantially bigger than you'd get in a rival Range Rover Evoque. In other markets, 555 litres is provided, but here Lexus has chosen alone in its segment to offer a proper spare wheel as standard rather than one of those irritating tyre inflation devices. Good on them. Now width-wise, there's enough room for 4 golf bags to be stowed sideways rather than across the diagonal. And push forward the split folding rear bench and up to 1,520 litres can be revealed. If you're familiar with the way premium badged compact SUV models are priced in the current market, then the asking figures for this NX won't cause too many surprises. Lexus has pitched it into the £30,000 to £45,000 bracket where most cars of this kind are sold, and structured its proposition almost completely around a petrol-electric hybrid power plant that's mated to an automatic transmission. At the foot of the lineup lies an entry-level front-driven 300HS version, but most potential buyers will want to find an extra couple of thousand to get themselves the E4 all-wheel drive system and extra equipment of the 300H SE variant that represents the sweet spot in the range. Beyond this model in the hybrid lineup, the mechanical layout remains the same, but the kit quota rises substantially through luxury and F-Sport derivatives to this top premier range topper. For the few potential NX buyers who don't want hybrid power, the brand is also offering a more dynamic 200T F-Sport variant with 235 brake horsepower from its conventional 2-litre turbo power plant. Onto the value proposition all of that represents. Though under the skin, this car shares much with a Toyota RAV4, it is, as I've just suggested, positioned well above mainstream badged compact SUVs of that kind. Now aiming to appeal to the kind of buyer more likely to consider posher, more stylized models in this class. Now even here, it's hard to compare anything precisely against an NX, not least because at launch it was the only hybrid contender in its segment. Now potential NX 300H customers must therefore pitch this Lexus against more conventional diesel automatic alternatives with similar outputs. I guess the closest match you could make probably lies with Range Rover's Evoque SD4, but NX 300H hybrid buyers might also be looking at cars like BMW's X4 xDrive 20D, as well as slightly boxier alternatives like BMW's X320D, Volvo's XC60D4, Audi's Q5 2-litre TDI, and the Land Rover Discovery Sport SD4. Against competitors such as these, an NX 300H stacks up very well. Now in two-wheel drive S form, its only real direct rival is the front-driven version of Volvo's XC60D4, a car it undercuts by a couple of £1,000 and can pretty much match in terms of running costs. Now for the volume 300H SE four-wheel drive model, the range of diesel rivals is much wider, but all the options are more expensive. You'll need £2,000 to £3,000 more to get yourself not only the directly comparable Evoque SD4 four-wheel drive auto, but also the Volvo, Audi, Land Rover and BMW X3 models I just mentioned. And you'd need nearly £7,000 more for the comparable BMW X4. In the unlikely event that you want an NX without hybrid power and are considering the rare 200T 235 brake horsepower petrol turbo variant I mentioned earlier, direct rivals are tougher to find. An Audi Q5 2-litre TFSI Quattro S-Line S-Tronic model with 225 PS is a fraction cheaper, but otherwise you'd have to find £2,000 to £3,000 more for the only other comparable cars in this segment: Range Rover's petrol-powered Evoque SI4 and the entry-level petrol versions of Porsche's Macan. If, having considered all of this, you conclude that it is a Lexus NX that you really want, then you're going to need to know just how generous the Japanese maker has been when it comes to standard equipment, traditionally a brand strong point. Well, you shouldn't be disappointed. Even the entry-level S version gets features like 17-inch alloy wheels, LED low-beam lights, LED daytime running lights, power folding mirrors, dual-zone climate control, and a high-quality 8-speaker stereo system that's controllable from the leather-trimmed multifunction steering wheel, and includes a DAB digital radio and the Lexus media display with the touch controller, plus USB and aux-in inputs. Also standard is the Drive Mode Select system, adaptive cruise control, Bluetooth phone compatibility, and hill assist control that stops you from drifting backwards on uphill junctions. That's all included with two-wheel drive NX 300h motoring, but as I suggested earlier, most buyers will be wanting to pay the small extra premium for a four-wheel drive SE version that, as well as the extra traction, adds roof rails, heated seats and larger 18-inch alloy wheels. Is it worth going beyond this and getting one of the really plush luxury F Sport or premium trim levels? Well, that's debatable. The key feature at luxury level is leather trim, while F Sport models get stiffer suspension with performance dampers and are the only variants offered with the option of Lexus's AVS adaptive variable suspension system. A navigation system is optional across the range, but it only comes fitted as standard if you stretch up to this top Premier variant, which builds sat-nav into a thumping 14-speaker Mark Levinson surround sound system. Now, it also includes a desirable 360-degree panoramic view monitor and head-up display. By this point in the range, though, you'll be paying the kind of money that would virtually get you Lexus's much bigger, posher and more powerful RX 350h SUV. My favourite feature is one that unfortunately you do only find further up the range: a wireless smartphone charger. Yes, that's right. If you've an Android phone, you don't need to plug it into anything. Just put your handset on the dedicated charging tray that's located conveniently between the front seats, and away it goes. Now, irritatingly though, you need to buy a clumsy case for this system to work with an iPhone. NX options include a panoramic glass roof, a rear bike holder, the metallic paint that I have here, and on lesser models, an automatically operable tailgate. On to safety, which is well covered whichever model you choose. Now, as you'd expect, you do get the usual electronic assistance for braking, traction and stability control, all coordinated as usual in a Lexus by the brand's clever Vehicle Dynamics Integrated Management System. Now, there's also a pre-crash safety system that scans the road ahead for potential accident hazards. If one is detected, you'll be warned, and the pre-crash seatbelt pretensioners will be armed and pre-crash brake assist to supplement the braking effort activated. Now, if you don't respond or aren't able to, then the system will automatically apply braking to decrease the severity of any resulting accident. Other standard safety features include tyre pressure monitoring, an energy-absorbing bonnet and bumper, anti-whiplash head restraints, an emergency brake signal for panic stops, ISOFIX child seat mountings, and, if the worst comes to the worst, no fewer than 8 airbags. As well as the usual twin front, side and curtain bags, these include a driver's knee bag and, more unusually, a front passenger cushion airbag. As a result, the experts at Euro NCAP awarded this NX a top 5-star rating for both in-car and pedestrian safety. In the 4 elements of the test programme, this Lexus scored 82% in both adult and child occupant protection, 69% for pedestrian protection, and 71% for safety assist systems that help avoid or mitigate injury in a collision. Now, if you want to go further in terms of safety features in this car, you'll have to get yourself this top Premier version, which also includes a blind spot monitor to stop you from dangerously pulling out to overtake, and a rear cross traffic alert system that warns you of approaching traffic when you're reversing from a parking space. Now, there's also a lane keep assist system to stop dozy drivers from veering out of their lanes on the highway, and LED headlights that automatically dip themselves at night time in the face of oncoming traffic. The urban bias of the Lexus NX emerges again when you consider its fuel economy. Or at least it does if you're looking at this 300h hybrid version, which around town brings the full benefits of its petrol-electric powertrain to bear. At first glance, the 1 mile limit for progression under all-electric propulsion seems a bit feeble, but in practice, you use that allocation only in very small chunks between which the battery resource is constantly being replenished by brake energy regeneration. Now, as a result, in built-up areas and stop-start traffic, the engine's nearly always ready to function in silent all-electric milk float mode. Which explains why this petrol model can deliver running cost figures that better those of rival diesels. Specifically, 54.3 miles per gallon on the combined cycle and 121 grams per kilometre of CO2 in the four-wheel drive version. Now, to give you some perspective on that, this means that you'll be going a couple of miles further on every gallon than you would in a rival BMW X4 xDrive 20D. 7 miles further on every gallon than you'd be able to get in an Audi Q5 2-litre TDI Quattro or Range Rover Evoque SD4, and around 10 miles further on every gallon than you'd manage in a Volvo XC60 D4 all-wheel drive or Land Rover Discovery Sport SD4. Go for the two-wheel drive NX300HS variant and the returns improve a little, but not hugely. The 4x4 model does, after all, function nearly all of the time in front-driven form as well. Now, the S model manages 56.5 miles per gallon on the combined cycle and 116 grams per kilometre of CO2. There aren't many direct two-wheel drive rivals in this market niche, but Volvo provides one in the form of the more efficient front-driven version of its XC60 D4, a car which shades this Lexus in fuel economy, returning 60.1 miles per gallon, but it can't match it in CO2 emissions, managing 124 grams per kilometre. And it's the super low CO2 emissions that really generate the big savings with this Lexus. Now, this four-wheel drive version puts out just 121 grams per kilometre of CO2. Now, to give you some perspective, that's the same kind of amount you'd be emitting in a little 1.25 litre Fiesta Super Mini. Overall, we're talking of a return that's 20 to 40% better than any other diesel-powered segment rival can manage, which in our country's CO2-based tax regime means the potential for huge reductions of benefit-in-kind liability for owners. As an example, the base two-wheel drive S model would cost a high-rate earner £1,884 a year in tax, which represents an annual saving of around £1,000 or more over, say, a rival BMW X3 or X4. Now, Lexus reckons that savings could rise to as much as £1,400 if you're comparing against, say, a diesel auto Audi Q5 2-litre TDI. That only leaves the returns you'll get from the single conventionally engined model in the NX range, the 200T petrol turbo. Now, this of course can't get near the hybrid standard of efficiency, but it does manage a combined cycle showing of 35.8 miles per gallon plus 183 grams per kilometre, which is very similar to the kind of returns you'd get from a rival Range Rover Evoque SI4 or entry-level petrol-powered Porsche Macan. Go for a hybrid NX and the residual values you can expect should look pretty healthy, at least as good as those of the posh Teutonic brands. Now, remember too, when considering depreciation, that an NX is better equipped than many of its German rivals. Now, to match this car spec, you'd have to spend extra cash on options with those cars. Now, money you're unlikely to get back at resale time. Where Lexus could do better is in the warranty it provides. Though there's a 5-year package to cover the hybrid engine, every other part of the NX package must be covered by an unremarkable 3-year, 60,000-mile deal that doesn't seem overly generous in this day and age, particularly since parent company Toyota offers 5-year cover on its models. But does that matter? This is, after all, a Lexus, a car which market experience suggests virtually nothing is ever likely to go wrong. Now, the facts are that hybrid technology generates fewer warranty claims than conventional petrol or diesel engines do. And if something ever should happen, so charming and helpful are the award-winning dealers in the network that you may end up almost being glad that it did. Now, as for maintenance, well, once you've taken ownership, an intermediate service is needed once you've passed the 9,000 mile point, and the main service will be needed at around 18,000 miles. Now, insurance is rated at Group 29 for the 300S two-wheel drive variant and 31E for the four-wheel drive 300H SE model. And if you want something plusher, you'll be looking at 32E for the luxury and F Sport variants, and 33E for this top Premier version. Lexus needs the NX and needs it to do well. For that to happen, this car will have to offer more than the traditional attributes that spring to mind when you think of this brand. Things like reliability, quality, refinement, technology, and great dealer backup. Now, of course, the company's proud of the reputation it's built upon these virtues, but it's well aware that for this model to succeed against well-established rivals like those from Range Rover, BMW and Audi, worthiness isn't enough. Lexus needs desirability, it needs design flair, it needs excitement, it needs an X factor. Spend time with this NX and increasingly you find yourself agreeing that this is just what's on offer here. That might not necessarily mean you'll want one. It's obviously not intended for the few who regularly want to get their tyres muddy in this segment, nor will it really suit family-minded driving enthusiasts. Then there are the distinctive looks. If your favourite model choice in this segment is something squarer and more sensible like an Audi Q5 or a BMW X3, you might find an NX a bit in your face. If, on the other hand, you like bold design and don't mind standing out a bit on the school run, it'll probably suit you perfectly. Such potential buyers will revel in the sophisticated drivetrain that shines in the city. They'll love the generous equipment levels, and most of all, they'll like the way that this car makes them feel special and different, just like a Lexus should. If you fit into that buying demographic, then I think you're going to absolutely adore this car. So there you have it. The NX may be a little too individual to sell in the kind of numbers its makers would really like, but then that's all part of its appeal. It's not perfect, but it's never boring. And in a market sector that's getting just that little bit stale, it's a breath of fresh air.